Later on, there's a free podcast for you to enjoy. But first, Mr. South has published a new book, Who's Who in Grunty Fen? The hitherto hidden heroes who made Grunty Fen what it is today. I went along to speak to him, and I started by asking him, Christopher, why did you decide to write this new book?
Before I answer that question, did we have to record this at Grunty Fen? It's not very comfortable here, is it? I mean, crouched in this hut. It was authenticity what you're after.
Authenticity is what I am after, and there is nothing like being on the spot to evoke all those memories that you have.
Yes, well, you certainly put me on the spot. What was your question? I've forgotten now.
Why did you decide to write Who's Who in Grunty Fen?
I've got a very important message in the answer. I've spent most of my life as a journalist, which is 61 years now, writing about people who think they're famous and shouldn't be, in my opinion. I've interviewed sports stars and flimsy starlets with no talent at all, and politicians who can't make a speech without reading the notes. And I thought there's got to be something better than all these stupid non-celebrities that has made themselves famous for nothing. And so I thought, let's get down to the grassroots. Let's find out whether real people in real places doing real things have been neglected, and there are the real celebrities, the real stars. And so I started digging around, not just Grunty Fen. I went beyond that, and I took on almost the whole of the Fens. And Carol, I can remember my first discoveries. I was astonished at what I found, almost immediately. August Burton. Now there's a name. It does sound a pretty impressive name, actually, but he had a very undistinguished origin. Just ordinary tradespeople living in some shabby circumstance out in one of the Fen villages. And yet his name really should go down, well, in history. In a sense, I've made that happen, this little history. He explored the Fens thoroughly for the first time. And he discovered many villages which nobody had suspected. It was like going into darkest Africa. And he found villages where people were following customs that nobody had dreamed of. The sad thing is that he did leave a pretty good account of most of the communities that he encountered on his forays into the Fens. He wrote a book called A Foot on the Fens, far afield, A Foot on the Fens. It was very full of F's. He found many villages and made a good record of them. And as I said, there's a sadness to this, because so many of them have been, well, you know what happens. I can't think of any way to put it more politely. They have been sucked back in. The surface of the Fen is not to be trusted. It is oozing with past civilizations, and sometimes it regurgitates and a Fen village reappears after a century or two, and others simply vanish. One has no way of knowing what layers of villages there are under the surface of a Fen field. Anyway, he pinned down many of them. Antoinette Claydon, there's another woman, and I have to be careful what I say here because she's still alive. She is a true heroine of Fen culture. She came originally from Putney in South London, and she has a minor inheritance. Her father was a tobacconist, and it doesn't matter. And the best value for money she could get in terms of real estate was to buy a house at Grunty Fen, as a matter of fact. And her ambition was to civilise the Fens. Now, as this little book will make clear, there's a good many people who have tried to civilise the Fens, and this is a feat yet to be fully achieved. She wanted to do it by providing reading matter. The county library had failed dreadfully. It wasn't their fault, but you see, I can't put this without sounding critical of the good people of the Fens. But look, not to beat about the bush, they burned the books. if the county library provided a full range of novels and factual volumes, in cold weather, people rushed into the library and the books were never seen again. I mean, that's the plain truth of it. She thought she could rescue the situation by inviting people to contribute their own books. And yeah, well, I don't think I'll tell you the outcome because I want you to read the book. But Antoinette Claydon who was that wonderful man, the architect?
Niven Parr, I think you're talking about. Niven Parr.
Niven Parr. Now, Niven Parr, once again, I must not, as if I'd want to say anything adverse about Niven Parr. He's still alive and still doing wonderful work out on the fens. Anybody with an idle moment, a couple of hours to take a spin across the seemingly uneventful flat fields of the fens may well see his finest work. If you come across a curious construction, a habitation, a hut, a barn, a pigsty, and it is of a classical nature, you will see columns in the Corinthian, Ionic or Doric order. You may see something Rococo, Baroque. These are his work. He has produced a synthesis of Western architecture. No, I correct myself because there is a strong Chinese influence in some of his work. So Oriental and Occidental architecture is brought together in the pigsties of the fens. You've got to read. You really must read about Niven if you want to understand the true story of English architecture in the 20th and early 21st century.
How many people did you bring to light, let's say, from the bleakness of Grunty Fen?
Well, and of course the villages in the hinterland as it comes and goes over the centuries. Many more than are in the book, my dear. Many more. I've had to set aside some noble people. Quite frankly, I could only really tell the truth about some of the people I've discovered. One must wait for, well, quite frankly, the Grim Reaper to, as it were, release one's pen in order to. I won't say any more about that. So I can't say I'm hoping, but I am expecting that in the course of time I may be free to tell the stories of some of the other people I've discovered. So at the moment it's a mere handful. As I say in the introduction to this modest volume, which is really a work in progress, do you know when the Hubble telescope was turned to a little blank bit of sky and the astronomers were astonished to discover that it was full of undreamed of and otherwise invisible galaxies. And it's the same with the fens. If you just turn your telescope, it almost needs no focusing. There was a dog. Do you remember Susan the dog? Have you read about Susan the dog? Amazing. A clergyman who, and the history of the clergy of Grunty Fen and neighbouring villages is not an entirely happy one. And in this case, the gentleman had read about the wonderful work of the big sheepdogs, the St. Bernards, who rescue stray people lost in the awful snowy wastes of the Alps. And he wanted to do the same thing. But he didn't think that sending dogs out across the fens, where many people do fall into dreadful peril in swamps and bogs, because as you know, I've told you before, one of the many perils of the swamps and bogs on the fens, even the puddles, is that they are deeper at the sides than in the middle. So people believe that they can sort of walk around the edge. Oh no, it's better to go for the middle. Anyway, so many people come into trouble on the fens, and in his time even more. Because, of course, the light was less about people. The hand torch hadn't been invented. So he thought he would put dogs out on the fen, trained dogs with not alcohol, which he was opposed to, round their necks, but he thought something that was more traditional as a sustenance for people who were hungry, exhausted and lost, would be meat pasties. So he had a way of attaching pasties to the dogs, who would then send out to look for the lost. Well, you can guess the outcome, can't you? I mean, the dogs ate the pasties. So he got round that by tying the pasties to the back of the dogs' necks so that they couldn't get at the pasties that they were carrying for the lost voyagers. Unfortunately, other dogs... Look, I won't tell the whole story, but you can guess what happened with that one. It's not a happy story. Some of the stories really do rather touching. The lady who, during the war, devoted herself to knitting parachutes for our brave airmen. And nobody knew who she was, do you see, because she would appeal for knitting materials, saying it was for the war effort, without telling people what particular effort she was making. And having knitted the parachutes, she used to take them to RAF and USAF stations all around and simply leave them at the gate with no note identifying her. And she did this, so far as we can tell, for 4 years. She gave up her job in the haberdashery department at an Ely store, and she devoted herself to knitting parachutes. Nobody ever told her the problem with a knitted parachute, and alas, it's a sad story. Even now I feel rather affected by the poor lady. But there are many sad stories. The vicar who tried to translate the Bible into Grunt, the local language, he was quite convinced, and he may be right, that the way people talk on the Fens is not a product. It's not a dialect of English or some other language. It is a tongue sui generis. It is Grunt. The language of the Fens is Grunt. And he managed to write, he began a vocabulary of it, and he managed several words, but he died, alas, and he died in a garret, having gone a little bit dotty, I suppose is the word you have to use, and it was very cold, and his landlady warmed him up by burning I can't bring myself to tell you about it.
Well, the cold, I think, has got the better of us this time. I'd just like to say...
chilly, isn't it?
It is. Yes. Thank you very much, Christopher.
That's nice of you to invited me to this hut.
That's quite all right. And I have to say that... thank you to the Gladlen for putting on their extractor fan from the kitchen, which has blown through the hut rather successfully.
Is this the Gladlen restaurant?
It's round the back of the Gladlen.
Oh, I thought it was just a hut.
No,
it's a restaurant.
It's actually the peeling shed where they peel the potatoes.
I thought I could smell something.
Well, so did I.
And what is that scurrying noise in the peeling?
We'll draw.
Yes, I think yes.
We'll draw a veil over that and say thank you very much.
More than a veil, my love.
Thank you very much, Christopher South. And we look forward to many more characters coming from your pen once it is allowed to flow.
When they're dead.
Let's hear that free episode of Dennis of Grunty Fen that I promised you.
Right, well, look, apart from terrifying pigeons, what else has been happening in Grunty Fen, Dennis?
My friend, Mrs. Jeffrey, she's doing all the laundry for the cricket team. She has to make 'em whiter than white, you see.
Well, she's a very house-proud lady. I mean, and I can't... she's the perfect person to ask to do it. Will she be doing your whites? Will she be laundering your cricketing whites, Dennis?
Well, I ain't got no whites, and they won't let me play 'cause I ain't got any. The nearest I got is sort of that's like a sort of yellowish grey colour.
Well, you must be able to get some cricketing whites from somewhere, sure.
Well, see, I did. See, when old Smalley's bakery closed, I sort of inherited his outfit with the white trousers and apron and the jacket and that. And
there you are. Problem solved.
Well, it wasn't really, you see, because I tried them on. Every time I moved about, there's sort of a great sort of cloud of flour dust come out of them. And then we tried washing them, and they went all sort of slimy and that, and they were like a slimy pudding. And then when we hung them up to dry, they went as hard and as crisp as blooming biscuits, Mr. South. I tried bleaching a pair of my old grey flannels, and we soaked them for 3 weeks in bleach, and all they did was come out sort of a dirty yellow colour, and I wore them. But the trouble was, you see, the material rotted. And then I was about to sort of do a bit of bowling, and I was rubbing the ball like they do on the down by...
Yes, all right. We needn't go into detail.
Where you're supposed to.
Yes.
And it wore a hole in my trousers because of the bleach. And then when I was running up the bowl, one of the legs fell off. But it was all right, because luckily I was wearing my long johns, and the sort of pad sort of covered up me embarrassment, if you know what I mean.
Yes, fine. Well, that's splendid. It really crossed my mind that you do possess one white garment, in fact, because you have that surplice which you wear over your cassock in church when you're officiating as organ pumper and so on. I suppose you would look a little odd with a foot of broderie anglaise round the hem when playing cricket, but nevertheless, it might be worth considering. What about the other members of the team? They have proper whites, do they?
Well, all of them do except me and Wooly. See, because Wooly Woolard, he's 3 height short for shilling. He hadn't got any whites at all. He always used to wear his camouflage jacket, and so they used to put him in the outfield over by the pond. And then
camouflage jacket?
Yeah, you see.
Carry on.
Well, see what it is. He's got like... Well, it's a bit difficult, you see. What happened was...
Sorry about the chickens.
If they hit the ball towards him thinking there was a gap in the field, they wouldn't see him, you see. And then all of a sudden, that old ball that'd fly up in the air, and just as they was about to run, a little voice from out of the camouflage and from out of the wilderness would say, "Out!" And that'll be old Wooly, because he's ever so good, with the ball and that. He's a bit slow mentally, but he's very fast with a red ball.
Where do you usually place him in the field, then? Where's he most used?
Well, out by the pond. Because you see, well, now I must explain that the old pond on our cricket pitch, well, it ain't like a nice sort of village pond what you would imagine that you see in the picture books. Because that pond, I think, is one area of the fen, when they drained it all them years ago, they missed it. And that pond, Miss South, well, to start with, has got kind of a green crust what go from one side to the other.
Maybe that's why I'd never noticed it.
And there's little eyes looking at you from that pond, Miss South. And I'm sure there are certain creatures living in that pond that have been there ever since Hereward the Wake's time. And so when a ball is struck towards that pond and old Wooly's over there, he's got a double incentive, you see. Because he don't want to have to go in that pond, because that's ever so deep. And you get a sort of scum ring up round your trousers and that.
It's a revolting idea. I can quite understand why Wooly doesn't want to actually go in the pond. Now look, if you can't play cricket because you haven't the white, Dennis, what do they let you do?
Well, there's one job.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's... I don't know, Miss South. They give us that job, me and Wooly have it, you see, and I don't really enjoy doing it, because that requires a lot of head work, you see, because there's all the adding up and the taking away and that, and we're not very good at it.
Well, I remember that your best subject at school was quiet time, so...
Yeah, well, and sometimes you break your pencil and you can't keep up, but we have to hang the numbers up. We're in this little shed, me and Wooly.
You're in the scoreboard shed?
That's right. And we're in the little shed, and sometimes in the summer, so they get ever so hot in there. And we got to keep running up and down this little ladder, putting the numbers up, and then some of the numbers are missing, you see, so we've had to borrow some of the hymn numbers from up at the church.
But I remember that the church itself is short of 2s on the hymn board, isn't it?
Yeah, and then there's sort of 7s down the other end, so we had to sort of swap and change, really. But
You're telling me that the church uses the cricket scoreboard 7s and you use the church 2s, or the other way around? Good heavens above. Yes, anyway, carry on, please. Yes.
Yeah, well, they sometimes don't know where to sing a hymn or else read at the end of the first over.
Now,
but anyhow,
it gets hot, you were saying.
No, that gets ever so hot. Mm-hmm. Oh, blast me, so that do get hot and that. And well, you see, the trouble is that, see, old Wooly, we don't know how to explain it really, but you see, Wooly's personal hygiene isn't quite up to the standards of other people, if you know what I mean, and he always wear them old willies. And he wear them all the year round. And when it get hot in there, you see, oh, blood. And then there's my trouble as well.
Oh, yes, your trouble, yes.
You see, they come over from the pavilion and they often try and tell us off, you see, about not getting the store quite right. But, you see, thing is, once they put their head in through the little hatch at the front, they sort of leave again because of the aromas.
Yes, I think I understand what you're talking about.
Thank you for listening to this podcast, brought to you by Grunty Fenery, keepers and purveyors of all things Dennis. If you'd like to know more about the world of Grunty Fen, please visit www.dennisofgruntyfen.co.uk, where you can also buy further episodes and memorabilia, including Mr. South's new book. If you have any comments on this podcast or suggestions for further topics for Mr. South to talk about, we'd welcome your emails. Please send them to dennis@dennisofgruntyfen.co.uk.